Hmm. Hello, beloved one. It's wonderful to be with all of you today. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I want to talk about happiness. How to have a happier life. This is a great pursuit for all people. Everyone wants to find their happiness, what that means to them. So today I'm going to give you just a few tools, things to think about, and ways in which you can increase your happiness or your overall enjoyment for your life. All right? So what stands in the way of happiness is fear. And generally it is fear that was created from childhood and is being carried daily in the body, the mind, and the emotional body. All right? So there really are just two main fears that people tend to have and that everything else stems from. One is the fear of not getting what you want or what you need. Those want and need can be interchangeable, sometimes a little tricky to discern the difference between. And number two, losing what you already have. So there are an enormous amount of variations in each one of those fears, right? So, for instance, fear of losing what you already have. Now, you may not fear that you're going to lose the life of a loved one, but you might fear that they become very ill and have a lot of physical problems from that time on, and that you have to watch them or witness them go through a very painful time. That is a type of loss. So think about these fears not so much in black or white or the extreme ends of the spectrum, but think about how those two fears tend to break down for you. What are those larger elements of those two fears that seem to come up for you again and again, regardless of the situation, right? It could be you feel it in your career, you feel it at home, you feel it in your relationships. It's something that you just feel inside of you. Different times, at different levels, but it seems to always be present. So those people who tend to feel or have access to more happiness are people who are on the lower end of those two fears in the scale of how you would measure them. Those two fears might be present for them, like all human beings, they are present, but not to the degree that for other people. And those two fears do not just make problems for you from what happened in this life, but they are also present with the past lives that you bring forward into this life. So this is not to make you feel worse about yourself or feel a victim that, I have all this from past lives that I've piled on in this life. Don't do that to yourself, all right? Everyone struggles with this, with these two fears to some degree or another. Everyone is bringing past life difficulties, challenges into this life. Everyone has had a varied childhood, some much more difficult than others on the outside, but the impact was very similar or the same on the inside, meaning that everyone experiences their lives differently. So don't tell yourself that you have created this terrible thing, this terrible heavy life. When you do that, you are feeding those two fears. The fear of not getting what you want or need, and the fear of losing what you have. So when you are aware that this is part of the human condition, right? It's part of operating as a human being. Then you're able to sit back and say, okay, it's not just me, right? I'm in excellent company with billions of other human beings. It's just part of being human. Because given your origins and evolution, you are wired to keep a certain amount of fear at the ready if you need it. If you need it to get away, to survive, you know this as the fight or flight syndrome, right? And that is a wonderful thing. It's kept the human race alive and continuing and growing. So I know that it is a burden at times, but it's not one you necessarily want to get rid of, right? So if you start with the premise that these two fears are rattling around inside of you, what begins to become very clear is that because you have free will, you get to decide how you react to those fears, right? So here's an example. Someone who has more innate confidence, that they didn't come into this life with a crushed confidence. They did not choose a family of origin that was chipping away at that confidence through their verbal interactions, their physical interactions, right? So this is someone who just has a higher rate of confidence. And because that's so, these are people who tend to have more happiness readily available. They tend to involve themselves in things more easily that bring fulfillment, that bring expansion to their lives, because their reaction to those fears is not as devastating as it is to others. So if you are someone who had their confidence deeply wounded in their childhood, even if it was unintentional by those that raised you, then you are going to struggle with that feeling of happiness. Because what is happiness? It is the feeling of buoyancy, the feeling of lightness, that you find the humor in life, but not disparaging humor or sarcasm that is meant to tear things down, but just the humor, that the lightness bubbles up inside of you. Happiness is more an absence of depression or heaviness, numbness. Happiness is the desire to engage in life, the desire to relate to others, to be a part of, not to hide away or to isolate. Happiness, yes, often is accompanied by smiling and laughter, that feeling that life is good, you are well, all is right with the world. That tends to be how people experience happiness, when there are good things happening. So if you are reacting to those two fears in a way that is more healthy, that is less inclined to give in to those fears, less inclined to feed those fears, then you will find happiness becomes more natural, easier to live inside of you, easier to flow to the outside of you, easier to receive from the outside of you, from others, right? So what I tell you, how to have more happiness in your life, is take some time to sit down and just feel those two fears. The fear of not getting what you want or need, and the fear of losing what you have. The degrees to which you feel them, and then start to connect the next dot. And what is the most common reaction to those fears? Now, going back to confidence, if you don't feel very confident about yourself, if you struggle deeply with feeling not enough, low self-esteem, low self-worth, however you want to think about it, if that's something that is very big for you, think of that as a reaction to those two fears. Because if you are afraid, like everyone else, that you'll not get what you need and you'll lose what you have, then if you have low confidence, it makes complete sense that those two fears would get very big. Because if you have low self-esteem, how can you possibly attract or provide or create or allow in what you want and what you need? And if you have no confidence in your own abilities, how can you possibly retain what you already have? Right? So even though the lack of confidence or self-esteem was generated in childhood based on what you were told about yourself, how you were treated, maybe some also what you came into this life with. But what happens as you grow to adulthood, and all of a sudden it really becomes up to you to provide for yourself, maybe for your family, and also to try to retain what you have. You don't want to buy a home and then turn around and lose it. No one wants that. No one plans for that. But it often happens because with those two fears always running in the background, given your upbringing, how are you reacting, right? If there is issues of low self-esteem, that's the reaction you are most often going to apply to those two fears. So, I encourage you to connect the dots, right? Feel those two fears. Just acknowledge that they exist within you. And just make note of how they often manifest for you. And when you get sort of sideswiped or feeling like the rug is pulled out because your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-confidence was not strong enough to hold those fears at bay, to not give in to them, to not feed them. So think about happiness, right? Happiness is a result of when you don't feed those two fears, however you do it. The lack of self-confidence was only one example. You have to figure out how you react to those fears most commonly and think of those reactions as you feeding those two fears, right? Whether it's depression or chronic anxiety. So get help if you discover there is a big thing here. My self-esteem is terribly low. That doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel healthy to me. Happiness comes with vibrant health, and I don't just mean the physical kind, but the emotional and the mental health, right? So maybe you need medication, supplements, a medical doctor, a therapist, a 12-step program, Al-Anon, boundary work, whatever you need to provide, to involve yourself in, to work towards the goal of not feeding those two fears by your reactions to those fears, right? So happiness comes when those fears are quiet. They flare up from time to time. That's normal, that's natural. You don't want to feel happy every moment. That is false. That is not a real life. But if you want to increase your happiness overall, then this is how you do it. You stop feeding those two fears, and whatever you have to do to stop feeding them, beloved ones, do it. Don't wait. Don't wait. Take that course, find that therapist, go to that doctor, ask someone for help, write about it, sit down with yourself. There's a lot you can do yourself that you don't have to pay someone else for. You deserve happiness. You deserve to live with those two fears in harmony, not discord. Not always running from those two fears. Always letting those two fears generate so many other fears. And let me be at the heart of whatever you do to stop feeding those fears. Sit with me, breathe with me. Let me support you, give you grace, my love, all that I have. Keep giving those two fears and your reaction to me. Mother, please help me to build my self-confidence. Show me how to build my self-confidence from the inside out. And when your reactions to those two fears shift and become more healthy, more loving, the happiness will flow. That will be the outcome of the effort. You can do it. All can do it. Don't wish for happiness. Get conscious, become aware, and let yourself have it. I love you, and I'm with you every moment. Namaste. Hi, it's Danielle, creator and founder of Beloved Publications, your home of Mother Mary's teachings as they're channeled through me. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment. I would love to hear from you. If you're interested in more of Mother's teachings, please visit our website, www.belovedpublications.com. And there you'll find lots of great ways of connecting with Mother. And if you want to join our community, you get an awesome free mini course on preparing for and connecting with your spirit guides. You will love it. So I hope to see you there soon. Thanks so much.